Hello everyone, and thank you for watching this new astrology video. Today's subject will be about psychological astrology again, like the previous video that we did a few days ago about houses and then human psychosynthesis. Make sure to visit our profile on patreon.com and watch videos that we upload there regarding psychological astrology. Today's subject will be about the horoscope and the defense mechanisms of ego. There is a theory of defense mechanisms in psychoanalysis. This is a theory of psychology that is often used as a key for interpreting human behavior. Applied in astrology, this theory can explain why some people often don't showcase the expected behavior their natal chart shows, but instead they behave as if they have transmuted the original tendency of their chart in a different expression. Some basic defense mechanisms from psychoanalysis are the following. Repression. Repression is when a painful experience causes discomfort and we try to forget it, to push it back to our subconscious. Denial of a painful event. Rationalization, which is the effort to justify in reason some attitudes and behaviors that we adopt to protect ourselves from emotional pain. Projection. This is the attribution of a characteristic or a way of thinking to someone else regarding an experience, an event which is too traumatic for us to accept that we are involved in it. So we project our behavior to other people, our thoughts to other people. Introjection is an incorporation of rules that other people have in our way of thinking in order for us to survive or to avoid punishment. Identification is a process where a person is trying to imitate the behavior of some familiar person who is in a position of strength related to him and works like a role model. And he feels more safe to do that. Overcompensation is an effort to replace a forbidden behavior with its opposite. For example, an example that psychoanalysts say is that a young boy is in love with his mother, but because he feels guilty for that, he changes this behavior and he hates his mother. So hate is actually love, which is disguised in hate, overcompensation. Displacement. Some emotions are not allowed towards one person, so we transfer them to another person. I cannot love my mother, so I fall in love with a person who looks like my mother. Somatization. This is a conversion of emotions to body symptoms. I'm in pain, for example, because of something I feel. This becomes physical pain. Or the stress that I have becomes physical pain. And I have a pain on my knee, for example, or my neck. The idealization of a person. So this protects us because we overlook other people's flaws. And we overlook that so that we are not forced to reject them. For example, a husband overlooks his wife's flaws because he is afraid of the conflict which will result in their separation or which will come after their separation. Intellectualization. This is a process where we use our mental functions instead of our feelings. It is too hurtful to use our feelings, to feel, to accept our feelings, so we try to rationalize the situation. So, for example, instead of feeling love, we try to understand love, which is not the same thing. Regression is when it is too painful to grow up, for example, because we need to take responsibility for something. So we prefer to behave as children immaturely. Sublimation is the conversion of an unacceptable emotion to another one which is accepted. For example, I'm attracted by a man, but because I feel I am a man and I am homophobic, for example, I change this feeling to a friendship, because I feel that to be friend with a man is accepted in my way of thinking. Or I am married to a woman and I like another woman, but I feel guilty for liking another woman, so I change this feeling to friendship, and I believe that this woman is my friend. Now, by studying astrological symbols, one can see these defense mechanisms in the chart, and these could correspond to symbols of the astrological language. For example, an aspect of opposition, could be related to a projection, to a mechanism of projection. It is quite rare, if a person has oppositions in his chart, not to see a behavior that is like a projection. The person balances between two counter forces, which are the sides of the opposition. He usually adopts and identifies with one side, and he feels that the other side of the opposition is an enemy. But actually, this is a projection. This is also a part of him, but he projects that part to another person. For example, one has a Sun-Saturn opposition in 1st and 7th houses. The Sun is in the 1st house and Saturn is in the 7th house. This person can identify with the Sun in the 1st house, and try to survive, to care for himself, for his own development. And he projects to the 7th house, to the partner, a behavior of being rigid, of him not letting him develop freely, of trying to control him, a controlling partner. So he projects this to other persons, and he indeed meets partners who are controlling. So he makes this happen. But then, after some years, he can change his focus, and he can identify with Saturn and become the controlling partner himself, having another partner who likes to develop, who wants to develop, but cannot develop because he is controlled. So this person could identify with the Sun until a certain age, and he can shift his identification to Saturn after one age. This can also happen in families. For example, someone has a Sun-Saturn, a Mars-Saturn opposition, where he has Mars in the 4th house and Saturn in the 10th house. And while he is young, he feels that his dad, his father, for example, is very controlling from the 10th house. And he identifies with Mars in the 4th house. He's the rebel in the house. Now, when he grows up and he becomes a dad, he might identify with Saturn, be the controlling father, and in a way, believe that his son is now Mars in the 4th house. His son is now the troublemaker. So he has shifted his focus, and the projection is also shifted to another person. He identifies with one side of the opposition and projects the other to persons in his environment. In the same way, a square a square aspect could be similar to an overcompensation mechanism, especially when the square is made of a personal planet and an outer planet, or Saturn. In this case, there is a difficulty. The personal planet cannot express itself freely. He is repressed by the outer planet or by Saturn, especially if he is not in its own sign or in a sign where he has dignities. In that case, something remarkable happens, and this planet attempts to express itself not in the sign and in the house where he is situated in the chart, but in the opposite sign and in the opposite house. For example, we have a person who has his sun in Cancer, but his sun has a square to Pluto. This sun cannot express itself freely. So this person overcompensates by becoming a Capricorn, by adopting the behavior of a Capricorn. Another example could be Piscis, a Piscis sign, who has a square to Saturn. His sun has a square to Saturn, could express itself as a Virgo. Or a Leo, who has a bad aspect to his sun. With a Leo, this might be less the case because the sun has dignities in this sign, but nevertheless, we see Leos who behave like Aquarius. They are focused on being collective, on functioning collectively. Piscis, who are obsessed with cleaning. And we can also see Capricorns who become spouses and make large families instead of working in business, because they have squares which make them change their focus, and the planet changes its expression to the opposite sign and to the opposite house. This is the case with the moon as well. A moon with a square to an outer planet is a very troubled moon. The moon is very weak compared to Saturn or Pluto or Uranus. So, especially if the opposite house allows the moon to have better dignities, then it might be the case that the moon attempts to get to the opposite house. For example, a moon in Scorpio, in square to Saturn, could try to express itself in the opposite house because it will become a moon in Taurus, and there it will function much better. Or a moon in Capricorn could attempt to get to the opposite house because it will function as a moon in Cancer. Many times we see football players with Mars in Cancer, and this is quite a surprise. And this is, for many people, is a reason why they believe that the system of a planet having fall in a sign is not valid and should not be used in astrology. Or a planet which is deterred, or a planet which is in fall. But it is not certain that the reason, it is not certain that this system should be assided. What we should study is that it might be the case that the planet tries to function in the opposite sign and in the opposite house in such a case. For example, Mars in Cancer, if it has a hard aspect to Saturn or Pluto, could try to become Mars in Capricorn, where he's dignified. And so we have a leader with Mars in Cancer, and we wonder why. But this is the case. And this could also be the case with Mars in Libra, where we could have leaders with Mars in Libra, and we wonder why. Or with Sun in Libra, which is also not dignified. And they become leaders, they become Sun in Aries because of hard aspects, of hard squares to the Sun or to Mars in the chart. So overcompensation is an essential mechanism of explaining why many people don't showcase this behavior their natal planet indicates for them. A sun might be in the second house, but we still might not see the person be economically autonomous, which is the main ambition of the sun in the second house. A person with a sun in the fourth house, but still he might not have his own house. He might not have his own office. And he might spend his time at work, but not his own office, working in a company, for example. Or a person with sun in the 10th house who seeks success, but still hasn't achieved anything in his life which is of great importance, but instead stays at home most of the day. These are examples that could be explained with the mechanism of overcompensation related to a square to an outer planet or to Saturn. These defect mechanisms can also manifest through other aspects, which can function as outlets for emotions in cases of internal conflicts. So, for example, if Sun has a square with Saturn, it is not necessary that he goes to the opposite sign or to the opposite house, because he might have a triangle as well. So if he has a triangle, a trine actually, if he has a trine to another planet, then the trine is his way out. The trine is his way out from the conflict that the square symbolizes. So if a personal planet has a hard aspect square to an outer planet or to Saturn, but at the same time he has a trine to another planet, he can follow the trine and has an outlet for his emotion. So many of the defense mechanisms which are mentioned can be related to such trines. For example, rationalization could be a trine if a Saturn is involved. Intellectualization could be a trine if Uranus is involved. Idealization could be a trine if Neptune is involved. Sublimation could be a trine if Pluto is involved. So if Saturn, for example, has square to, if the Sun has a square to Saturn, but at the same time it has a trine to Neptune, then idealization is his way out from the conflict with Saturn. These trines, of course, could also exist as independent aspects, but in this case, because of the pressure of the hard aspect, they become outlets of emotion, so they could be related to defense mechanisms. Some defense mechanisms can be related to other astrological processes, not aspects. For example, the denial or repression could be related to having many planets in water houses in our natal chart. If we have many planets in water houses, the 4th house, the 8th house, and the 12th house, that might mean that we try to repress our memories, to push them back to our subconscious. Having a stellium in such a house could function the same way. A displacement, for example, changing the focus of an emotion from one person to another, could be related to having a planet in a house, while at the same time this planet rules another house. This is also a defense mechanism. This could be a defense mechanism. If Mars or Venus, for example, is in the 4th house, and it is in conjunction to the moon. And in a way, I'm a boy and I'm in love with my mother. But this cannot be accepted because of some guilt that I might have. For example, this Mars or this Venus could also have a square to Saturn, so I might feel guilty for that. One way that I could express that is to change the focus of this emotion from Mars, not to the 4th house where Mars is situated, but to another house which Mars rules. For example, Mars could rule the 7th house, and I could focus my libido to my partner. Or Mars could rule the 6th house, and I could refocus my libido to working harder, working more hours a day. Mars could rule the 5th house, so I could change the focus of my libido to being more creative or loving my children. Mars could rule the 10th house. In that case, I might again work harder or be ambitious. This is also a defense mechanism, to having a planet in a certain house where its behavior is not accepted, and then changing the focus of the energy of that planet to the house this planet rules. So it is possible, when the planet doesn't have enough dignities, or it doesn't have support by aspects to express itself in a certain house, the displacement could lead it to express itself in the house it rules. We keep our emotions, displacement means we keep our emotions, that we don't change the emotion, we don't rationalize, we don't intellectualize. We keep our emotions, we accept them, but we change their focus. We redirect them to a different target. This could also be related to sublimation, because it also changes the sign of the expression. For example, if my Mars is in Libra, in the 4th house, and I am in love with my mother, but I also, in a way, respect her, Mars in Libra, or admire her, and Mars changes its focus to the house it rules, now the house it rules will have on its house cusp either Aries or Scorpio, traditionally. So the energy also changes. It is not Libra anymore. It is either Scorpio or Aries. In that place, I become more aggressive, with more ambition, with more masculinity than the one that I have by expressing Mars in Libra. So if the planet changes its focus to the house it rules, it also changes the sign of its expression. It does not use the natal chart sign, but instead the sign it rules. So this could also be described as sublimation. For example, the example that we used is, I'm in love with someone, but I cannot accept that. I feel guilty, so I see him as my friend. I change the nature of my emotion. I see him as my friend. Now, aspects can easily be explained using the following glossary, regardless of relating them to defense mechanisms or not. For example, a conjunction is the need to share the same space. This is a good analogy. If we have, so to understand and interpret a conjunction, we should imagine what would it mean for the two planets to share the same space. For example, a Venus and a Saturn. Would they like to sit next to each other? Saturn would certainly like to sit next to Venus, which is a young, beautiful girl. But would Venus want to sit next to Saturn, who probably is an old man, and he would be a little bit grumpy as well? would Mars and Saturn want to sit next to each other? I think neither Saturn nor Mars would like to sit next to each other. So then the way the planets interact tells us whether a conjunction would work or not. An opposition is a need to compromise our way of thinking, our disagreement. We should both come to the middle, meet somewhere in the middle. A square is a dilemma, a choice that I have to make. I need to make a choice, and I bounce between two different directions. And for some time, I might not be able to choose, and I might try to follow both of them. For example, having a wife and a mistress. For example, having two jobs. A trine means good fortune, but also the possibility to expand in a different context. Now that could also mean to do something I'm not supposed to do. For example, if I have a Jupiter-Pluto trine and I come from Jupiter, then I expand to Pluto, and I might, for example, expand to illegal transactions. But because it is a trine, that means because it includes fortune, nobody stops me. So a trine is not always something good, because it might mean that one expands to a behavior and nobody stops him. And in conjunction is a situation where there is some kind of intensity. For example, I get into a room and I see that everyone is looking at me, that nobody likes me, but nobody stands up upright and tells me that in the face. There is an intensity, but everyone is trying to hide it. No one is displaying it directly. This is something that boils from within. This is the inconjunction. And I don't know how to handle this. I keep it inside, and this is not very good, of course. That's why inconjunctions many times are related to psychological diseases, psychological conflicts, because they are related to repressed emotions. A sextile is a situation where we realize that we are different, but we also realize that we could share our work and somehow work together. For example, Sun in Cancer and Sun in Taurus, one is romantic and the other one is practical. Each one is good at one thing. We could combine these two, or we could argue that we're different. In the process of time, a sextile realizes that it is better to realize that we are different, but each one is good at something, and if we put both at work, we might achieve more. It's good for working together with someone, sextile. Teamwork. A semi-sextile is an aspect of misfiring. For example, we ignore something, but we come across it later on, and we regret that we ignored it. We neglect things when we shouldn't. A semi-square could be related to incompatible intentions. It is similar to a square, but the choice is not very apparent that needs to be made. A sesquiquadrate is an incompatible intentions, but they are also related to conflicting actions. So I give conflicting signs to the other person. He cannot tell what I want because I give him conflicting signs. Now, all these are keywords to use when interpreting aspects and when relating them to defense mechanisms of ego. I hope this video was useful to you and gave you some insights to interpret astrological aspects. If you have any questions, feel free to write them in the comments, and I will be glad to answer them to you. Have a nice evening.